So 2 handouts on your table that we gave out tonight. We're going to talk a little bit today about what we call the liturgical year, but don't get lost in those yet. Open up your Bible, if you wouldn't mind. I want to look at a couple passages real quick. So first, let's open up to Acts chapter 20. So Acts of the Apostles, chapter 20, verse 7. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, right? 5th book. Anybody there? Acts chapter 20, verse 7. I'm going to read really short sentences, and I'm just going to read like 5 of them from 5 different places. You tell me what you think the common theme is. On the first day of the week, when we were gathered together to break bread, Paul talked with them, intending to depart on the next day. Next passage. Told you it's going to be short. 1 Corinthians chapter 16. Keep going towards the back of the book. First Corinthians 16, last chapter in 1 Corinthians, starting verse 1 and 2. You might think like this is self-serving, but it's actually not intended to be. Now concerning the contribution for the saints, as I directed the churches of Galatia, so also you are to do. On the first day of every week, each of you is to put something aside and store it up, as he may prosper, so that contributions need not be made when I come. Next passage. Last book of the Bible, Revelation chapter 1, verse 10. Revelation 1, verse 10. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet, saying, write what you see in a book and send it to the 7 churches. One more. Go backwards now. We're in the last book. You got to go backwards. Luke chapter 2, starting in verse 1. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be enrolled. This was the first enrollment when Quirinius was governor of Syria, and all went to be enrolled, each to his own city. Anybody want to tell me what you think those things have in common? The last verse probably threw off everyone else. What do the first 3 all have in common? What? Sunday? What's Sunday? Yeah, first day of the week, the Lord's Day, right? Okay. What's the last thing talk about? What's the significance of what Luke is writing? Do you think? Exactly. He's putting a story into a historical context. See, the scriptures aren't, like the scrolling text on the screen that begins long, long ago in a galaxy far, far away. That's not how God acts. God acts at particular times in particular places. God acts in history, which means time matters. Days matter. Seasons matter. That's the point. And Scripture's teaching us that. So it tells us things like when so-and-so was emperor, or when so-and-so was governor, or on what day such and such happened, because it's trying to locate what God's doing. So when we start, what we want to talk about tonight is to try to get a handle on what we call the liturgical year, which for some of us is probably just really foreign. Like some of you probably wonder, like, I wonder what color Father's going to wear this week. You know, like, maybe you think, like, Father Prentice is like, man, I look good in green. I think I'm just going to wear green. Personally, I hate green. I went to Michigan. Can't stand the color. But I got to wear it more than any other color in the year. So it's not something like I'm trying to overcome my hatred or antipathy towards Michigan State. There's a reason that we wear green. So there is a reason that we wear green. And there's a reason that we wear white. And there's a reason that we wear red. And there's a reason that we wear violet. So if you were at Mass, and of course you were, last week, all of a sudden you realize, wow, Father's wearing violet this week. He looks like Helen. Helen's got this purple color on. Like, so why do we do that? We just get bored? Want to get something new on? Or is there a purpose behind that? So we want to try to get a handle on how the church looks at time and dates and seasons and what that's all about. Okay? So that's what this is a help to. So this is what we call a liturgical calendar. It's not a coloring book. It helps us to look at how the church approaches the year. So we are in what we call the season of Advent. So Advent just comes from the Latin word for coming. So in Advent is a season of, if you look at so like 11:45 on your clock face, if the calendar's a clock face, right? So it's just not quite straight up. So between November and December, you see this wedge that's violet. Everybody got that? Okay. That indicates the color of vestments that we wear in that season. But the color of the vestments has to do with the particular season. So Advent for the church is actually the beginning of the new year. So January 1st is the beginning of the calendar year, but the church new year began last week with the first Sunday of Advent. And so this season that we're in right now is a kind of a prolonged period of time. It's 4 weeks to prepare for the celebration of Christmas, or the Feast of the Incarnation is what we would technically call it, the solemnity of the Incarnation of Jesus the Lord. So in these days, we're trying to, the world around us is kind of running around like crazy, and maybe some of us are too. So this time, for most people in the culture that we live in, is a time to shop. That's what December's about, right? I got to find a perfect gift. I got to buy certain things for different people, my family, friends, work, whatever. Parties, all sorts of celebrations of whatever kind. What the church is trying to get us to do is actually to slow down and to begin to think about, how am I and what am I about to celebrate? So there's this preparation time to get ready for the celebration of Christmas. And so we're going to hear in the scriptures in these weeks. Last week we heard Jesus' exhortation to be watchful and to be ready, because Advent refers not only to the first coming of Jesus, but it's also reminding us that there will be a second coming of Jesus. The first coming of Jesus was in disguise, if you will. The Lord came as a helpless infant, so that, as many of the saints would say, so that we would not dare to come close to him, because who's afraid of a child? And so the Lord brings himself. First of all, he allows himself to be conceived in the womb of a woman that he created. And he who the universe cannot contain suddenly begins to grow in a woman's womb. And so we're going to begin to look at those passages that kind of begin to speak about Our Lady, Mary, and her role in cooperating with God's plan to get his world back in these next few weeks. Father Prentice next week, next Thursday, is going to be talking a little bit more specifically about Mary and her role in salvation history. And I know Father John spoke a little bit about her. We've touched on her several times in here, but we're just going to look next week in a kind of more focused and concentrated way on Mary and her role. So we wear violet or purple in this season because purple is kind of a penitential color. So there's 2 times, if you look at your calendar, where you see violet or purple on the clock face or the circle. One is in Advent. It's kind of a smaller wedge, and then there's a bigger wedge. That's a season of the church year that we call Lent. These are the 2 penitential seasons in the church. Penitential meaning it's a time to examine my life and to consider, how am I responding to the Lord? Do I take for granted what it is that we're about to celebrate, say, at Christmas or, say, in Easter? Are there things in my life that I need to put down? Are there things in my life I need to pick up? Lent is a much more focused time of kind of penitential prayer, but Advent is also a penitential time. So that's kind of what the violet signifies. Does that make sense? Okay, we'll get to Lent more specifically in a moment. Then immediately after Advent, you see this white wedge, this small little wedge, and that's the Christmas season. So there's 2 things to note here. The first is Christmas Day. Anybody play piano? Anybody? I'm not going to ask you to play, don't worry, but who plays piano? John, what's an octave? 8 notes, right. So the church celebrates particular days of great significance for an octave. Christmas Day in the church is 8 days. The celebration of Christmas itself is 8 days. Why? Because the church knows how to party. And I mean that. You cannot possibly exhaust in one day what it is that we're trying to celebrate on Christmas. Because what are we celebrating? That God, the creator of the universe, is attached to you. Attracted to you. In love with you. Thirsts for you. And has come to rescue you and me. And so the Lord, on the day of Christmas, we celebrate that the Lord, who has existed for all eternity, now emerges on the scene of human history in human flesh as he leaves Mary's womb. And he did it for us. Not us, he did it for you. And you, and you, and me. And I can't possibly express my gratitude to God in 24 hours. So the church celebrates that for 8 days. So those of you who put up Christmas trees, don't throw them out on the 26th. All those days are days to linger over the mystery of what it is that Jesus has done out of his love for us and what the Father and the Spirit have done out of their love for us. Then the season of Christmas, so there's a day of Christmas, which is 8 days long, the octave of Christmas. So you'll hear, if you come to Mass during the week between Christmas and New Year's, you will hear all the prayers that we say on Christmas Day because it's still Christmas Day in the church. And then when you get to the 8th day of the octave, all of a sudden now you begin to enter into the Christmas season. And the Christmas season goes up through the feast of what we call the baptism of the Lord. So in these weeks of the Christmas season, we're looking at everything from the incarnation and the birth of Jesus to the visit of the Magi, what we call the Feast of Epiphany, when Jesus is manifested to the pagans. That's actually our feast, those of us who are not Jewish. That's usually celebrated on January 6th, or on a particular Sunday in our case, as opposed to January 6th. We look at a celebration of the Holy Family. So one of the Sundays is dedicated to the Feast of the Holy Family, which is not, many of us have this really kind of idyllic vision of the Holy Family, like it's Jesus, Joseph, and Mary, and everything's just lovely at home. Jesus' family is massively dysfunctional. How many of you don't know that? I find that really encouraging. Why is it why am I saying that? Because there are instances in the scriptures, in the Gospels, where it talks about the quote-unquote brothers and sisters of Jesus. Who are these people? We don't know, quite honestly. All we know, and all the church teaches, and it goes back to the first century, because there's reasons to think this. We'll talk maybe a little bit about this next week with Father Prentice. But the church has always held that Mary was perpetually a virgin, that Joseph and Mary have no conjugal life together. So people look at things and go, okay, they named him Jesus, and they had no relations together until Jesus was born. That's a passage in Matthew. And they go, see, it says until. But then there's another passage in the Old Testament which uses the same verb, or it uses the same word, and it's referring to one of David's wives, and she had no children until she died. Huh. You think she had children after she died? The point there isn't to say anything about what happened after, it's to talk about what's happening before. The church has forever taught that Mary is perpetually virgin, that she has no children except for Jesus. Jesus is her only son. It talks about the firstborn, not because there are more, it's because in the Jewish tradition, the firstborn is of great significance. There's a reason why that's said. So who are these people? There is no definitive teaching by the church. There are two explanations that have been put forward in the history of the church, going back to the beginnings, either of which could be okay. We just don't know. One of them, the most ancient one, comes from a man named Epiphanius. He's a doctor of the church who was known as the Hammer of the Heretics. Kind of a great name to have, huh? Whose teaching was that they were children of Joseph by an earlier marriage. So there's a tradition, small t tradition, that Joseph had been married before, that his wife had passed, they had had children, and these are his children, which is one of the reasons why you often see Joseph as depicted as being older than Mary. We don't know that, but it's just a tradition. There are pretty strong historical reasons for it, at least going back to some of the writings of the early church. But the church doesn't teach that definitively. So the brothers and sisters of Jesus could be children of Joseph, or they could be cousins. The understanding of the household and the family, certainly in a Jewish culture, is very different than us in our understanding of nuclear family. So the tradition of St. Jerome and of others is that they're cousins of Jesus, who would refer to each other as brother and sister, and not as cousin. That's kind of like a little sidebar. Why is it significant to think of them? Because they mock Jesus. They say he's out of his mind. One of them in John chapter 7 more or less just taunts Jesus. It's the time of a feast, and a major feast, and he looks at him and, kind of the paraphrase would be, so are you going to go up to the feast and tell everybody who you are? Jesus knows broken families. That's the point. I find that helpful. It's not Jesus, Joseph, and Mary just sitting back, having a TV dinner, talking about how lovely everything is. Some of the conversations that are going on in the house have to hurt greatly. I picture some of his, familial relations saying things, and Mary just kind of going, and Jesus just kind of turning to her and saying, it's okay, I got this. So in celebrating the Feast of the Holy Family in the season of Christmas, it's an occasion for us both to look at what it is that God's plan for the family is, by all means, and for marriage. But it's also a chance to remember that Jesus has entered into all of our experience. Jesus has experienced everything that you and I experience except sin. He knows rejection. He knows tension in the house. He knows betrayal. He knows pain. And he knows death firsthand. So that's also in this Christmas season. And then it ends with the Feast of the Baptism of the Lord, which is the beginning of Jesus' public ministry. All those things are in this little white wedge, right here between the violet and the green, okay? So we will wear white during those celebrations. Not because we're feeling particularly bright and cheery, but because we wear white. So white's a symbol of joy. Okay? Does that make sense? Get that? Then we go to what we call ordinary time. Now, a lot of people hear ordinary time, they go, oh, I guess it's just like normal time. But ordinary time doesn't mean normal time. Ordinary time refers to the word ordinal, which means those weeks that we count by number. So if you're paying attention at the beginning of Mass, somebody comes up to the lectern and they says, welcome everybody to Our Lady of Good Counsel. Turn off your phone. Today we celebrate the 16th Sunday of Ordinary Time. You're like, what the heck does that mean? That means it's the 16th week in this series of weeks that we're counting. So these are the weeks of the year that we count by numbers. They don't belong to Lent or to Advent or to Christmas or to Easter. They just fit this season called Ordinary Time. And it's split, as you can tell. Part of it comes right after the Easter season, and then part of it comes after the Easter season. So part of after Christmas and then after Easter. It's the green part. It's the biggest color on the wheel, right? So we wear green in those weeks on Sundays. And we do that. Green's a symbol of what? Life, growth, right? So we wear green. So we're not focusing on any particular aspect of Jesus's life and ministry in those weeks. We just are working our way through the scriptures. Okay? Immediately after that first block of ordinary time, you get the bigger wedge, and that's Lent. Okay? So Lent is one of the earliest seasons in the church, if not the earliest season in the church. And it was created for you. Those who were discerning coming into the church. So in those days, in the early days, right, it wouldn't have been those who were baptized in another tradition because you were either Catholic or you were not. You were pagan or Jewish. And so these weeks were the weeks when those who were discerning coming into the church would meet with the bishop. You get to talk to him as opposed to people like us. And he would teach what we would call the catechumens and whatnot who are coming into communion with the church. And that was an extended period of time of examination. And he would just lay out the mysteries of the faith, and they would meet weekly for a long time. And we have, in the case of one of those bishops who used to teach, one of the guys in Jerusalem, he used to teach what we would call RCIA, or Becoming Catholic, in what is called the Church of Holy Sepulchre, which is the church which is built on top of Jesus' tomb, and then the Golgotha, where the crucifixion took place. So imagine having RCIA at the tomb. We have, if you will, the transcripts of those classes going back to the 4th century. You can read them online. It's Cyril of Jerusalem. They're extraordinary. That was the model of RCIA, or Becoming Catholic. That's what Lent's about. Lent just comes from an Anglo-Saxon word which means springtime. So this is a time it's primarily for those who are discerning to be baptized, and then for those who are discerning, who've already been baptized but not Catholic, to discern coming into the Catholic Church, and then for all those who've already been baptized, who are living in communion with the church, to do some serious examination of their lives. And Lent's kind of got a twofold focus. The first part of Lent is just looking at my life and taking seriously the reality of sin. And when we start talking about the moral life in January, we'll look more concretely at sin and why it is that God hates it. But that's the first part of Lent. Just to hear clearly the call over and over again in Lent is repent and turn away from sin. And create in me, O God, a clean heart. So that's the first part of Lent. But then the second part of Lent shifts gears. And it becomes this more and more focused look at the passion of Jesus. So kind of shifting into the Gospels where Jesus is foretelling his passion when his betrayal is beginning. And then it gets to what we call Holy Week, which is what we call in the church the Great Week, which culminates on what we call Holy Saturday, which is also known as the Easter Vigil. That's the night when those of you who will be baptized, and those of you who will be confirmed will be confirmed. It is the night above all nights in the church, and it is the liturgy beyond all liturgies in the church, and it's long, like 4 hours long. And it's most of it in pitch black for the beginning, with one candle, who represents Jesus, the light of the world. And so Holy Week are these days which will include, it begins with Palm Sunday and Jesus' entrance into Jerusalem, where he is greeted as King and Messiah and Lord, and then it culminates on Good Friday with him being crucified, the same people who were cheering him as Messiah. So we're going to have Palm Sunday on that Sunday. Thursday is what we call Holy Thursday. We celebrate that night in a particular way Jesus' institution of the priesthood and of the Eucharist. The next day is Good Friday. It's the only day of the year where it is forbidden to say Mass. So we don't say Mass that day. We have communion, but we cannot say Mass. So we consecrate all the hosts that we're going to use for communion on Good Friday on Holy Thursday night. And you'll see a procession at the end of Holy Thursday as we'll leave the church, and we'll invite everybody just to kind of follow us down the hallway, and we'll put the Eucharist in the chapel, which is at the end of the church, and we just keep the church open till midnight, and people just come and pray. And we just have in our minds Jesus' exhortation in the Gospels to keep watch with me. And then the next day is the only day in the year that we can't say Mass, and it's the only day when the horror, if you will, of the crucifixion is unveiled in front of us, and we call it Good Friday. Because it's the day in which the King offered up his life on my behalf, which is why it's good. And then the next day is a really strange day in the church. It's Holy Saturday, and it's this in-between time of the awkwardness of the Lord has died and been buried, but we are not yet at the joy of the resurrection. And so there's kind of a strange thing. There's no tabernacle. There are no tabernacles with hosts anywhere on that day. And so the altars in the church are stripped. There's no flowers in the church. There's no candles in the church. There's no nothing in the church. We just remove everything to make it look stark, to help us understand sensually, with our gift of our senses and whatnot, what it is that we're contemplating here. And then that night begins the Easter season with the Easter Vigil. And that begins the octave of Easter. So just like there's an octave of Christmas, there's an octave for Easter. And Easter is 8 days long. And then the Easter season is 50 days long. So we have 40 days of Lent to be penitential. We have 50 days to celebrate. So that's the big white wedge after the violet one that says Easter in it. And we wear white again in that season. Or gold, either one. Then you get that little tiny thin red wedge. That's Pentecost. Pentecost is the feast of the giving of the Holy Spirit. We'll say lots more about these things as we keep going along. I just want to give us a sense of how this works. We wear red that day. And we wear red because red is a symbol of one of two things, either the Holy Spirit, which is what we're celebrating on Pentecost, given to us, or a martyr. So red for a martyr is somebody who has been killed out of hatred for the faith. Not somebody who kills. Somebody who's been killed. Martyr just comes from the Greek word meaning witness. So whenever you see Father Prentice or Father John or myself in red, it means that we're either celebrating Pentecost, which is not happening if we're in winter or fall, right? It means it must be the feast of a martyr, okay? And then we get out of Pentecost and we get back to ordinary time, and then we just keep following that all the way through until we get back to Advent. So that's the year, okay? Why do we do this? We do this because the church is trying to get us to learn how to linger. So there's no way we can possibly keep in the forefront of our minds all of the mysteries of what God has done on our behalf every day, all the time. And so the rhythm of the year gives us an opportunity to say, right now, I have a chance to focus on preparing myself for the celebration of Christmas. Look a little bit inside my life and go, okay, where is it I'm not living watchfully, Lord, waiting for your second coming, which is either going to come when you return or when I die, whichever comes first. We buried a guy yesterday from the church who was 54. Jesus came for him yesterday. That was his advent. So the church is just constantly trying to remind me to pull my head out of the ground, not live in illusion land, and think about the Lord's return. And am I ready for it? And if not, what do I need to do to get ready for it? So that's kind of this focus in Advent. But then as we get closer and closer to Christmas, now it's just a time to do something which many of us struggle with, right? Because maybe especially as men, but not just as men, we're much better at doing than being. Like a lot of us don't feel productive unless we're doing something. But the Christmas season in a special way is a time just to be. It's a time to look, to gaze, to ponder. Mary is the model for us during Advent and Christmas, and the word that's used in kind of a privileged way for Mary is that she ponders these things. She mulls them over in her mind. She lingers over them. And a lot of us are we just move, at least me, man, I just move way too fast. And God's trying to constantly get me to slow down and just to stop and to look. So for example, we'll walk by a manger. What's a manger? Who puts manger scenes out in there, or a creche out in their house? You know, the little Christmas creche, huh? So you walk past it. You know what? Anybody know what a manger is? Yeah, it's a trough. Animals eat out of mangers. So here's this little baby lying in a manger, right? Here's God in the flesh as an infant lying in a trough, surrounded by animals. Where is he? What town? Bethlehem. You know what Bethlehem means? Someone said it. House of bread, right? Bet means house in Hebrew. Bethlehem is the house of bread. So here's God in the flesh, lying in a manger, which is to say a trough out of which animals eat, in a town called the house of bread. And what is Jesus going to go on to give us? Himself, under the appearance of bread in the Eucharist. He's already beginning to tell us something about who he is and what he's come to do. But the point here is, how can it be that you and I would just fly past that? Or pull it out of the boxes and find a perfect place on the mantle or under the tree and, arrange everything without thinking about, what am I doing? What am I looking at? Or how can it be that we walk past and even wear on our necks, on a chain, a man nailed to a tree, and we don't think anything of it? So we just fly past imagery or whatnot without thinking all so often. And in these seasons especially, the church is just going, whoa, 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 just stop for a second. Wait, look at what's there. Look at him. Why in the world would God come as a baby? How can it be that you matter that much to the creator of the universe? That you're worth the trouble? There's a priest, he's passed away now. He once was put in a book. He was talking about when he was a young man, he would walk by a manger scene and look at the child Jesus there, and he would just shake his head. He says, I don't understand this. Like, why would God do this? And a man, as he was talking to him one day, he overheard him say that kind of out loud, and the man stopped and turned and looked at him and said, because love does things like that. You look at a cross and you go, I don't understand how the creator of the universe could allow himself to get executed in the most horrific, barbaric fashion. Because love does things like that. Which tells me I don't know anything about love. So we're invited just to slow down and to gaze. And to ask God, for especially in these days right now, for two things especially. Wonder and awe. Think of the last time you experienced awe. For some of us, it's the birth of a child. I think that's one of the most concrete, tangible experiences of awe. For some of us, maybe we can't even come up with the time we've experienced awe recently. For me, the most recent experience of awe was walking through Auschwitz, which is not a positive experience of awe, but it's an experience of awe. You get there, and how do you know you're in awe? When words just don't come. You just can't say anything. Like, I'm just stuck. There are no words. So we're supposed to ask the Lord, there's a biblical expression, which is something like, I'm just going to put my hand over my mouth and shut up right now as I look at what God has done for me. And that's what the Lord and the church are inviting us to do right now in preparation for Christmas. Just ask God, Lord, help me to know, what am I celebrating? Why do I have reason for hope? What's the big deal about Christmas? And the more that we can understand that, and the more that the Lord can enlighten us on that, then the more totally transformed your life and my life will be. So personally, I'm just kind of using Lent to or Advent rather, to focus on, there's a line in one of St. Paul's letters where he simply says, hope does not disappoint. College football referees disappoint. Politicians disappoint. Family disappoints. Friends disappoint. Hope does not disappoint. We tend to think of hope like this. Oh man, hope we win. Hope it doesn't snow. Hope it does snow. Hope the cancer comes back benign. But that's not hope. That's wishful thinking. Hope is an anchor. Hope is certain. Hope is there. It's solid. It's reliable. What's the object of my hope? God's love for me. Manifest, visible in the person of Jesus. Lying there in a trough, come for me. So that's not to say don't try to find gifts for each other. We give gifts to each other in imitation of the Lord who gave the gift of himself. That's why we give gifts. Because he gave us not only all the things that we have, starting with our life, he gave us himself. Not only by becoming flesh, but by going to the cross. And in imitation of him and in honor of him, we then give gifts to each other. That's the whole point. That's the purpose. So maybe just ask the Lord, continue to teach me what this is all about, and do everything you can to find a way to get yourself in front of an image of the manger scene, whether it's one on your house or pull one up on your phone, get a painting and just pray with it and go, Lord, I just want to look at this and gaze at it and understand it more deeply because you want to show me, Lord, that you did this for me. And the person who knows that has a sense of confidence and peace in life that somebody who does not know that will never have. That's not to say I don't have problems. It's to say that in the midst of all the problems, there's a peace that can't be shaken. So on one hand, like what we're doing tonight might just sound kind of, maybe to some of us, bland or logistics or whatever, but I'm doing it for a couple of reasons. One is because people get confused oftentimes by just simple things like why are colors changing and whatnot. But the church in offering us a liturgical year is trying to teach us how to focus on different things. So that's this other little handout here is a good just little complement to the pie chart, if you will. And it talks about the rhythm of the liturgical year. It talks about things like solemnities and feasts and memorials. So, for example, next Thursday, is the solemnity of the Immaculate Conception. So the church has ranks of celebrations, and the ranks are solemnities, feasts, and memorials. And solemnities are of higher degree of festivity, and then under that is feasts, and then under that are memorials. So things like memorials would be, so feast would be like the feast of, if you flip to the second page of this little handout on the top right section, actually begins on the last two sentences on the bottom left. So there are three distinct levels for ranking the feast days in the church. A solemnity is the liturgical celebration of the highest rank that commemorates an event, a person, or a belief of the greatest significance and universal importance in salvation history. So examples would be Christmas, Easter, Pentecost, Christ the King, Immaculate Conception, Solemnity of St. Joseph. A feast is also a liturgical celebration of greater importance, but it's of a lower rank than a solemnity. Special feasts include the Feast of the Holy Family, the Baptism of the Lord, the Transfiguration, the birth of Mary. And then the lowest rank of a feast day is a memorial. Examples of those would be Guardian Angels, Our Lady of Guadalupe, and of the Saints. So all throughout the year, if you come to Mass, you'll come to understand that we celebrate almost every day of the year, either something or someone. And this is, I think, especially helpful for us as Americans because we, by and large, have no heroes. Because America is, so Europe's roots are very Catholic, and so feast days in Europe are still celebrated. They may not be going to church anymore, but everybody knows this is the feast of whoever it might be, and he did or she did this, and they know it. We, on the other hand, don't have much of an understanding at all of the saints, which would be, another way of saying the saints would be the members of God's Hall of Fame, right? So the only people who ultimately matter. You don't get into that Hall of Fame, you flunked life. You are an abysmal failure. You are a capital L loser if you and I don't get into heaven. Okay? So, but I need examples. Like I need heroes. I need people close by. Pope Benedict has this awesome imagery where he talks about how in ancient times, before, not even in ancient times, but before the GPS, sailors sail by what? Stars, right? That's how they navigate. So, and then he goes on to talk about how life is like a voyage across the ocean. But where am I going? And how do I get there? And Pope Benedict wrote that, so Jesus is the light, right, who gets us home. But he goes on to say, but I need other lights close by, like the stars. And those people, he says, those are the ones who have lived good lives. They're the saints. They teach me how to live. They give me models of how to be heroic, charitable, merciful, chaste, whatever. They're people who struggled with what I struggle with and overcame them. People who surrendered themselves entirely to the Lord. And they show me I'm possible of more than I so often allow myself to settle for. So as you're going, the point of that is just to say, as you're going through the course of the church year, and you get to celebrate these different figures, these aren't simply people who lived a long time ago, because they are alive with the Lord in heaven. So they're both examples and intercessors. And just like someone gets to know their family tree, so there's this, big rage among some people, be like, I got to find out my DNA, I want to do a genealogy. I got a buddy of mine who just did a blood test, or a cotton swab in his mouth or whatever he did, and he's like, hey, I just found out I'm 10% Jewish. He had no idea. He's all ecstatic about it. Well, do your whole bloodline. I mean, the saints are like they're the equivalent, right? It's like, I want to get to know my family because I've been adopted into God's family. So who are these people? And they're not just statues or names on churches. They're real men and women who walked this earth, who lived through what I'm living through, and who responded heroically to God and lived a life of virtue. And the more that I get to countless people have no one to look at. So who do I emulate? I emulate an athlete, or I emulate a celebrity, whatever that means, or I emulate who knows what. But the only person to emulate, the only person to follow the example of, the only person to model my life after is somebody who can show me how to live a great life, and that's a saint. And so the rhythm of the church year just exposes me to these people. And most of us as Americans are more or less kind of just ignorant of most of history. Kind of embarrassingly so, quite honestly. So, does that make sense? So, is this helpful to kind of walk through this? Yeah? I pray it gives us some more. One of the challenges, again, of coming into the church for those of us who've grown up in another Christian tradition is we do strange things. And I want you to feel at home and to know what we do and why we do what we do. And the whole arrangements around the liturgy is often a very confusing thing for people. So that's why I'm trying to do it tonight. The vision that John has is, this is the St. John who's been exiled to an island called Patmos. And the Lord appears to him and communicates to him a series of things that he wants to communicate to these 7 communities. So the church isn't a building here, it's a community. They couldn't build buildings yet, actually. They were illegal. So they are, that's why John's in exile, because he's going to die there, because he belongs to an illegal superstition, namely Christianity. So the 7 churches are these churches in Asia Minor, which would be modern Turkey. And he sends letters, which are messages from the Lord to communicate things that the Lord both wants to honor them for and rebuke them for. The Lord's way of interacting with his people is very worth trying to embody in our own interactions with people. He always begins by saying what you do well. That's very important, actually. When you want to correct somebody, start by doing what they do well. You do this really well. This is excellent. But this, and this are a little out of whack. But start first with honoring. It's not to butter them up. That's not because Jesus doesn't flatter. We do, but God doesn't. But you start by honoring. This is great. This is in place. This is not in place. But if you lead with that, it's likely to be less fruitful. Okay, that's the 7 churches. I wouldn't start by reading Revelation. It's fun to read. Just lends itself to a A lot of confusion. Anybody else? And any of this with the liturgy or seasons or whatnot? Here's an odd thing to think about. So Christmas, like any of us ever have a tradition, you grew in a family where you'd have a birthday cake for Jesus? So I don't want to scandalize you by this, but Christmas is not a birthday. Christmas is a wedding. So obviously, what's happening there is the eternal Son of God is leaving Mary's womb, right? But it's not as if the eternal Son of God begins to exist that day, or began to exist 9 months before at the moment of his conception. You and I began to exist the moment we were conceived. Jesus didn't. He's the second person of the Trinity. He's eternal. He's the one through whom everything that has been made has been made. For whom and through whom everything's been made. What happens in the incarnation? The incarnation is the enfleshment, right? So that's actually the solemnity of Christmas, is the solemnity of the incarnation of our Lord. So the second person of the Trinity takes human flesh. That's a wedding, people. What happens in marriage? The two become one flesh. God is so shockingly in love with the human race that he has wed humanity to himself, and he will never divorce it. That's Christmas. Does that make sense? You get that or no? That's astounding. There's a passage in the prophet Isaiah where the Lord says, as a young man delights in a virgin or in his bride, so does the Lord delight in you. Got an image? This is so much more than the Lord likes you, or he's going to let you into heaven so that you can have some fun over there. This is the creator of everything is passionately desirous of you, so much so that he does scandalous things. He's born to a woman in a town which isn't even mentioned in the Old Testament. He does seemingly nothing grand on the huge world stage his whole life. He never writes a word. And he's executed in the most painful fashion because he wants to wed you to himself. Ponder that. How can that be, Lord? That's so when we say, like, we're supposed to take, that's why we got an octave, right? That's why we're trying to imitate Our Lady who's pondering things. Because you can't put that into like a paragraph. Even the words that I just say don't do it any justice. This is why people who really love each other, at a certain point, they just stop talking. Because I can't communicate to you what I want to say to you. The words ruin it. There are no words to say what I want to say to you. It'll sound trite or corny or canned or hallmarky or whatever. So I'm not going to say anything. What am I going to do? I'm just going to look at you. That's the model of prayer. That's what we do with the Lord. So the church is just inviting us to gaze at the mysteries that we're celebrating right now. And maybe this sounds like something you do pray, or maybe it's something you don't, and you don't even think it's appropriate, but these are great days to just say, Lord, I want to know how much you love me. I need to know how much you love me. I need to know who I am to you. I need to know who I am. Maybe some of us feel broken, frustrated, depressed, lonely, confused, no matter the facade that I'm wearing right now. Go to him and say, Lord, I need to know. I'm dying to know who I am and that I matter. And he wants to show it, and he wants to reveal it. That's not a selfish prayer at all. That's the prayer he wants to answer. I want you to know what you mean to me. I want you to know love does things like this. So find a way to slow down in these days and do those things and see if it's not a Christmas that's unlike any Christmas you've ever celebrated. And then once you know that, then what do? Then you just spend the rest of your life going, so what do you want me to give back? What can I possibly give back to God for all that he has done for me? I will give you my life, Lord. Whatever you want, I will do. And that's the whole essence of the Christian life. See, so many people, and maybe even so many of us, I'm trying to win God's love. I'm trying to live a particular way, hope that, man, this is just good enough. I can present it to him and go, here, do you like me now? And the Lord's like, you don't have to do any of that. How you live is important by all means, but you can't win his love. I can't win his love. I have his love. The first thing is not to love. The first thing is to be loved. And most of us, if we're honest, we don't do that well. We don't handle that well. I like giving gifts because I'm in charge. It's awkward to receive gifts. I like gifts, don't get me wrong. I especially like Masters tickets. I'm just kidding. Keep trying to drop that hint over and over again. But it's awkward to receive gifts because someone's trying to tell you what you mean to them. And God is trying to tell us what we mean to him. And what we mean to him is so much more than we could ever dare to imagine or to hope for. And to just get a glimpse of it changes everything. That's the Christian life. I live my life in response to what he's done for me, not to try to win it.